This is a podcast where we seek to help people to reason together by applying logic and sound theology to all aspects of life. And today, we're going to apply quite a bit of both to a subject Christians have wrestled with for a very long time: the doctrine of hell. Our guest has proposed a view that, I guess, Tim, in one sense, it attempts to take something from traditionalism, annihilationism, even universalism, and then it asks, like, hey, are those incompatible ideas or can they fit together? So, Tim, as you introduce our guest, because you know him better than I do, what do you have to add to that introduction?
Yeah, I'll just, before we introduce him, I'll just say that he and I had the opportunity to be on a panel together at a regional EPS conference, I think back in April. And at this event, he was also giving the keynote talk on the topic that we're going to discuss today. And we were, we had an Airbnb that we were sharing with a couple other guys, and we were having tons of fun doing that. And you can imagine what all of the meals are like there. We instantly just get into big, deep theological conversations over, first thing in the morning, we got our coffee, we sit down at breakfast, and bam, we're rolling. And I remember talking to our guest, and he was telling me what his main talk was going to be about. And the topic of hell came up. And, that's a topic that I've thought quite a bit about over the last several years, and even how, I can take my Molinist lens and apply it there. And I often like to, say things that I'm that Molinism gives the best shot for hopeful universalism, even though I don't think universalism is true. And I with Dr. Strange in mind, and in God's middle knowledge, I say that God created the best feasible, freedom permitting world in which evil is ultimately defeated and everybody who's not trans world damned is saved, and things like that. So, I've thought a lot about this. We've got some YouTube videos on it. And then our guest was telling me the night before his talk what he was going to be speaking on: a new view of hell, something different than annihilationism or universalism or the traditional view of hell, or, all these. Yeah, and I was skeptical. It's like, come on, man, really, something new? And I was like, whatever. Okay, this guy's smart, so I'm sure it's going to be entertaining, and I'll go listen. Well, wow. I went and listened, and immediately, as soon as it was done, I was like, we've got to have him on the show. And so it's been several months, but he got my attention. He's a serious thinker, a serious philosopher, and also knows how to have a lot of fun at the same time. So why don't you bring him on?
All right. So Chad, we'll bring Chad on here.
Chad McIntosh.
Thank you for joining us here today.
Thank you, gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be with you guys.
Well, thanks for being here. We're thrilled. Man, did you hear everything I just said about you?
Yeah, I sure did. Yeah, that was a fun trip. Going down Georgia mm-hmm. there in March. Was it mid-March or late March?
Was it March? Okay. Yeah, that sounds right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you were telling me the night before what you were going to be talking about. You didn't give me the details. You just said, I think there's another view that hasn't been discussed anywhere in the literature or anywhere else. And there's this other view of hell that we've got to talk about. I'm like, whatever. We there's no new views of hell. Anyway, what really got my attention during your talk was, although it seems a little fantastic at face value, I have to reevaluate and say, is it really that fantastic? Or that, maybe I would say at face value, it might seem absurd. But then I have to ask myself, is it really? Because what you've done here, and I'll let you explain it, is you've taken all the proof texts that everybody's using to defend their unique position of hell. And you say, oh, I can take those. Oh, and you over there, annihilationists, I'll take yours. Universalists, I'll take yours. Traditional view of hell, I'll take yours. Oh, look, I've got them all. And if you have a view that can make sense of all the data, is it not the inference to the best explanation? And so I'm just going to say up front, it sounds a little crazy, the view that you're going to offer, but I really have to ask the question, is it true? And you do ask that question at the end, and I'm not going to spoil it. But I'll just say this: we have to at least consider it and take it seriously. So, Chad, tell us about this view.
So I think the best way to put the view on the table would be to walk through what I call the traditionalist defense. Because in the end, I do think this is a version of the traditional view of hell, that at the same time does justice to annihilationism and universalism, at least the biblical case for those other views as well. So, according to the traditional view of hell, as we all know, not all people will be saved. Some will be damned and damned forever. Annihilationists, they agree that not all will be saved, but they maintain that the unsaved will at least eventually be annihilated. They think they're just going to be snuffed out of existence.
No suffering for eternity.
No suffering for eternity. They're just like blipped out. As it's the opposite of creation ex nihilo, right? It's just like gone. Mm-hmm. Universalists, they disagree on both counts, right? They maintain that all people will eventually be saved, even if there's an interim period of suffering before which they are brought around in the end. So the dispute between all parties seems intractable, right? How do we move forward? We all got their arguments. We all got our favorite biblical texts. And it seems like, there's no real way to go forward. It's just like, we're at stalemate, exegetically, intuitively, philosophically. But I think there may be a way forward. And let's think of it this way. Imagine being a freshman back in college. Some of us, that's a lot longer ago than others. So you're talking about the problem of evil in Philosophy 101. And you can't talk about the problem of evil in Philosophy 101, at least if you're a good professor, without talking about Alvin Plantinga's free will defense, right? Yeah. And very simply, Plantinga's defense aims to demonstrate no logical incompatibility between these two propositions. Number one, God is omnipotent, omniscient, and wholly good. And number two, evil exists. Okay, so there's your two propositions, and he wants to show that they're compatible. There's no logical incompatibility between these two. So what's the strategy? He says the strategy of the defense is to find. Well, I got to do the Plantinga voice. I was fortunate enough to actually take some courses with Plantinga.
Wow.
I think I got it down pretty good. Okay. As Plantinga explains, the strategy of the defense is to find a proposition R that is consistent with 1, such that 1 and R together entail 2. Okay. I was planning it for you.
Nice.
And the candidate proposition he comes up with in his defense is 3. God creates a world containing evil and has a good reason for doing so. All right, there you go. So long as 3 is even possibly true, he says, it follows that 1 and 2 are consistent. Doesn't need to be actually true.
Right.
But it does seem possibly true, right? And more than that, it actually seems plausibly true that God creates a world containing evil and has a good reason for doing that. Okay. So you leave Philosophy 101 thinking about the problem of evil and Plantinga's free will defense. But later that day, you take another class, Systematic Theology 101. And you learn about another problem, the problem of hell, okay? And your professor presents the traditionalist's case for belief that not all people will be saved. He walks through all the texts, but the clincher for you is when Jesus himself just straightforwardly says that not everyone will enter the kingdom of heaven, Matthew 7:13 through 23. But instead, some will go away to eternal punishment. Pretty clear, right? Matthew 25. Open and shut case until the professor presents the universalist biblical case, right? For the belief that all humans will be saved. How else are we going to understand all the texts that universally quantify over humans as recipients of salvation? Just as in Adam all sinned, in Christ all will be made alive, right? Romans 5, you got Romans 11, 1 Corinthians 15. There's all these texts that say all will be saved, right? The all in these passages, universalists insist, should just be taken at face value. All means all, right? Not some. So wow, there's an apparent inconsistency here, right? How are these two propositions compatible? Not all people will be saved, and yet all humans will be saved. What's going on here? So you're troubled by the conflict here, but the spirit of Plantinga has followed you from Philosophy 101 to Theology 101. And so you raise your hand and you ask, in your best Plantinga voice, is there a proposition P consistent with the proposition not all people will be saved and the proposition all humans will be saved, such that together they entail five, all humans will be saved? Are they consistent? Is there some proposition that renders these two propositions consistent? Okay. So you're thinking about if there's a traditionalist defense, in other words. So your professor, who is unusually clever for a theologian, he suggests as a candidate 6, all people not saved will cease to be human. Okay. If that proposition is even possibly true, then the two propositions before, not all people will be saved, and 5, all humans will be saved, boom, they're consistent. It's a defense in the same way that Plantinga's free will defense operates that renders an apparent conflict compatible. So you've constructed the free will defense. And so long as that's even possibly true, that all people not saved will cease to be human, that follows that the other two propositions are consistent. But more than that, I think a good case can be made that it's not just possibly true, but very plausible. And here I would gesture toward what I've elsewhere called the spectrum view of the image of God, and we can talk about that if you want. But the basic idea is just that the image of God is something that it's not essential to us, but we could actually lose it. So there you go. There's the traditionalist defense that I think kind of ropes in something that everyone can be happy about: the universalist, the annihilationist, and the traditionalist.
Yeah, so these are heavy topics, right? We're talking hell, we're talking, and they seem abstract, but they have real consequences theologically and evangelistically that we're talking about here. So, if you're watching this and you're going, I'm a little bit confused, don't worry, we'll try to flesh it out the best that we can, and we'd like to invite you. Hey, does that make sense to you? Go into the comments and let us know if that makes sense. I think that's articulated well. So if you enjoy conversations like this, where we are willing to explore these difficult theological and philosophical questions, make sure you subscribe to this channel, like this video, join the conversation in the comments about this. That helps us get more of these conversations in front of people. So make sure we do that. So you talk about the free will defense, which we just talked about. And now let's get into the you can stop being human and the Imago Dei, because I think that's kind of where then your model, I guess, that you're, I don't know about proposing, but you're at least saying, hey, this is on offer that no one's talking about. That seems to be the two places where it's carrying some unique ground. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that's right. So just to put a period on the traditionalist defense, we've got a way of interpreting the text favored by annihilationists, which say the unsaved will wither away or be no more. They'll perish or be destroyed. And my proposal is, when a human person loses his humanity by losing the image, well, a human is annihilated. Something has exited existence. A human being has exited existence. A natural kind that formerly belonged to the category human no longer exists. But at the same time, I think it's pretty ecumenical, because it's a version of traditionalism, because all unsaved people will remain damned forever. And it's nonetheless consistent with the universalist claim that all humans will be saved. So there you go. Now, the key premise there is all people not saved will cease to be human. Now, if that's possibly true, the defense goes through. Is it plausible? Now, that's where we get into the spectrum view. And I defend that at length in a few different places. But here's the pitch. What does it mean to be made in the image of God? I mean, obviously, that's a very fraught issue. I love this quote that I came across in my research on the image of God. He begins his book by saying, quoting one of the Desert Fathers or whatever, who's got this massive tome of theology. He's got tons of things to say about everything. And then when it finally comes to the topic of the image of God, it's one sentence. It says, "Do not speculate about the image." And that's it. But that's what we're going to do. We're going to speculate about the image. And here's what I think we can say with some plausibility. Whatever else it might mean, what it means to be made in God's image is to resemble God in some way. We resemble God. I think how do we resemble God? Well, the Old Testament doesn't really give us the answer. The New Testament, however, I think does. We resemble God by resembling the God-man, Jesus, right? It's very, very clear. In the New Testament, Jesus is not said to be made in the image of God. He is said to be the image of God multiple times. 2 Corinthians 4, Colossians 1. So it's very significant. Jesus is the image of God, and we are being conformed to his likeness, right? So resemblance, however, if what it means to be made in the image of God is we resemble God, and what that means is that we resemble Christ, I think the implication is inescapable. Resemblance is something that comes in degrees, okay? We can more or less resemble Christ. But if that's what determines what it means to be human, then we can be more or less human to the extent that we resemble Christ, more or less. To the extent that we resemble the paradigmatic human, the man, the perfect, the true man. So that's why I call it the spectrum view, is that we're all somewhere on this spectrum of humanity, where at the one end you have Christ, and at the Christ likeness, and at the other end, the bad end, for want of a better term, I just call it monsterhood, right? So we're either progressing toward Christ likeness or regressing toward monsterhood, and then I explore some reasons for thinking that we can just cease to resemble Christ altogether. So biblical and philosophical reasons by losing the image entirely. So that's kind of the broad's eye view of the spectrum view. I don't know if you guys have any clarification questions about that.
Well, I always knew that Josh was on the spectrum. So now it's clear.
I almost spit my water out all over my computer. That would have been bad.
No, and that's what really got my attention. I was talking about the monster view. And monsterhood. And I remember having some good conversations with you after your talk on that. So yeah, I'd like to get into that soon, but the spectrum model that you're bringing up makes sense to me, because it does seem that there are degrees, even among Christ followers. We see some who follow Christ more closely than others, and the goal is always to try to follow him and to be a consistent Christ follower. But I'm definitely not perfectly consistent. Josh does a better job than I do.
Be more or less like Christ, right?
You're right. Yeah. And so if there's degrees there, and we can see, and I like to talk about this just when it comes to hitting the mark, missing the mark, hitting the mark. And, hitting the mark is loving God, loving your neighbors as Jesus would, and like you said, being like Christ. We're hitting the mark, the objective purpose of our existence. We look at people like Hitler, and they missed the mark by miles and miles and miles. And so there's definitely degrees. So that whole thing makes a lot of sense to me. And so the more one misses the mark, and especially the more one misses it over time, I can see that it makes sense to turn into something monstrous.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think if you pay attention, whenever there's a tragedy in national conversation, pay attention to how the perpetrator of the tragedy is described. Mm-hmm. A lot of people describe them as monsters, demons, inhuman. This is a very deep, visceral reaction that we have toward grotesque evil that I don't think we should dismiss as merely metaphorical in many cases.
Yeah, it's intuitive.
I think that's good. And so I have a few questions that pop to mind when it comes to this. Is there any thought that there might be a danger, if we're talking about a spectrum view, where we can see people as less valuable than others depending on where they are on the spectrum? Or are we saying, like, as long as somebody has a modicum of the image displayed, they have utmost, like, they are valuable to the nth degree, as long as they have a modicum of the image displayed? When the monsterhood fully takes over, that's when the image is completely forfeit, and thus they are no longer human. Because I think some people would hear this and be like, well, does that mean my non-Christian friend is less valuable than I am because I'm more resembling the image of Christ and image of God than they are? So I think that's a good clarification maybe to give the audience as they listen.
Absolutely. That's going to be like the main objection everyone raises to this view, is that it's just morally unacceptable because it has this implication, and I don't deny it has this implication, that people can be more or less valuable. Now that, I mean, it's clear the Bible even ties human worth to the image of God. So I think that's just an implication of the view. But at the same time, I think the reason that makes us chafe so much, and I think we might be historical outliers in this in many ways, we have inherited views about human worth and human dignity and human nature that no one held up to about 200 years ago, 2 to 300 years ago. And so we have to sort of, first of all, situate ourselves historically to understand why this view might rub us the wrong way in this way. But let me say this. I think it intuitively makes sense that the more you resemble what is supremely valuable, God, the more valuable you would be. Right? That just makes sense. That makes just good intuitive philosophical sense. But we do have to be careful. And this goes to your point, Josh. True, humans don't all resemble God to the same degree, but all do resemble God to some degree, right? And that's enough to ground a baseline of value and ethical treatment, regardless of where they are on that spectrum, right? So that's basically what I would say. And let me add one more thing too. And this just goes to kind of taking off, which is really hard, taking off the sort of political and ethical lenses that we've all sort of been wearing since birth. Okay. Here's how I think I can show you that there is a degreed difference in value between human beings. Compare a 3-year-old toddler, brimming with all the love, happiness, and innocence that a child of God could have, right? Josh, you mentioned that you have 3 kids. I know, Tim, you have kids. And I mean, these are the most precious things that you can imagine and that are in our experience, right? Now, compare a toddler like this to the most hardened MS-13 gang member on trial for human trafficking, child molestation, rape, capital murders, and he smirks at his victim's family in the courtroom. Okay? Compare these two human beings. Well, forgive me, I think the child is more valuable than the MS-13 gang member. I just do. And I think you're just denying common sense, observable, empirical realities. You're just denying what your lying eyes are telling you. If you don't accept that, I think these facts just speak to a real value difference that underwrites intuitive judgments about value and justice in the real world, regardless of whatever egalitarian illusions we might have been raised with.
Let me ask this, and maybe I'm not thinking about this correctly, but it seems to me that, I mean, you're not denying that everybody started out with equal value, but, you know, I mean, we see, you know, you brought up the MS-13 gang member. I brought up Hitler earlier. We see, I mean, the reason why this is sad is because we see people using their own freedom. I talk about libertarian freedom, our own freedom to destroy our own value when we freely choose to live opposed to Christ. And so that's what makes it sad, is we see people freely choose to diminish their own value, that they were created in the image of God. They had equal right. And I think that's why, you know, when it comes, you brought up just the last 200 to 300 years of thinking about human rights. And let's think about the philosophical foundations or the theological foundations of our nation, where, you know, Thomas Jefferson got it right when he said, we hold these truths to be self-evident. He's talking about these objective and unalienable rights that are given to us by God that ought not be violated by anybody. But it seems to me that the reason we have jails where we take people's freedom away is because they have freely chosen to violate their own value. And among other things, they have freely chosen to diminish the image of God in their lives. And that's why we have jail. That's why we can take away their rights, because they have, they've forfeited them. So yeah, I think, I mean, I think two things can be true at once, that you're not saying that somebody was created with less value. You're just saying, hey, these folks freely chose to destroy the value that God gave them. Do you think that's right? Okay.
That's exactly right. And I think when we sin, when we do evil things, we literally, not just metaphorically, we literally dehumanize ourselves in this way. We are marring God's creation, and we are destroying it. We are defacing it. And I think that's true on at a very metaphysical level, not just metaphorically.
I think that's good. Well, the other question that brought up to me is, of course, I think this all makes sense philosophically. And you talked about the biblical data. We talk about the spectrum, and then we'll get into the monster view here towards the end part. But when we talk about the spectrum of humanity, what's the biblical precedent for that? My mind immediately goes to Nebuchadnezzar. That's where my mind goes for some reason, where he's literally debased as an animal. He is not a human anymore for 7 years, basically. And then God restores his humanity and basically says, hey, now you better recognize who I am. Are there other instances biblically where we go, oh yeah, there seems to be a spectrum that is being played out?
Yeah, interesting. I would like to hear the Nebuchadnezzar example fleshed out a bit more, because that would, of course, help my case. That's pretty insightful. Let me give a few reasons. The first is, there's this really good book by I think it's G.K. Beale. Title slips me, but he defends this thesis. We resemble this on biblical grounds. We resemble what we revere, either for ruin or restoration. Another way he puts it is, we become like what we commit ourselves to. He traces this principle from the Old Testament all the way throughout the New Testament. Join yourself to the Lord, become one with him. But what does Paul say? Join yourself to a harlot, become one with her. Right. One of the clearest examples is in Isaiah. Isaiah, where he's mocking idolaters, but what he says is interesting. He says, those who make them, these idols, will become like them. He says, those who make idols will become like idols, stiff, lifeless, blind, deaf, and dumb, spiritually empty things. Paul picks this up again in Romans 1, where he describes the ungodly as exchanging the glory of the immortal God. Now that's interesting. That's that phrase here, the glory of the immortal God, because a lot of New Testament scholars think that this is a phrase that's synonymous with the image of God. So they've exchanged the image of God here for what? Images resembling mortal man and birds and animals and creeping things. And so there does seem to be a loss of glory, or maybe even the image being contemplated by Paul here. Another indication is that, and this goes to your point, Josh, we actually see quite often throughout the Bible wicked and ungodly people described in non-human terms. Jesus himself referred to wicked people as dogs and swine, ravenous wolves, serpents and vipers, and he associated them with the demonic. Of course, the apostles, who were great Christ followers, they did the exact same thing. Peter calls ungodly people unreasoning animals, creatures of instinct, and also compares them to dogs and swine. This is not light stuff, right?
Jesus even called Peter Satan at one point. So.
Yeah. And so,
but
so I think there are indications that we can literally dehumanize ourselves with sin throughout the Bible.
Yeah.
Another category here that would support the spectrum thesis would be theology of divine adoption. In the Bible, salvation and damnation are often presented in terms of filial loyalty or kinship. The saved to God, right? And the unsaved to Satan. So, and the image is closely related to sonship, or being a child of God. Sons resemble, sons and daughters, children, resemble and are intimately related to their parents, right? In fact, the very word for image that is used to describe Adam resembling God is also used to describe Seth resembling Adam, right? So that children resemble their parents. So this theology of divine adoption becomes relevant because we also can be adopted by a very different father figure, one that's not so good, right? And we thereby become like him. We would start to resemble him. And this goes back to Beale's thesis that we become what we revere. We change ourselves into what we attach ourselves to, spiritually speaking. So theology of divine adoption, I think, can be brought into to support this. And then lastly, which we already gestured to, is just the reality of what we might call inhuman evil, or what philosophers call horrendous evil. Evil that's so great, so horrendous, it just goes beyond ordinary human agency and experience to explain. And when we encounter evil like this, we just intuitively, we almost can't help ourselves but describe it as monstrous, inhuman, demonic, satanic. And so my hypothesis is sometimes that's just literally true.
Wow.
So there's a very brief case for the view that we can lose the image. Some biblical stuff thrown in there with some philosophical sprinkled on top.
So I want to, and Josh, don't let me jump ahead too far here. So go ahead and tell me to, push the pause button on this. But what really got my attention back in March was really starting to talk about what's going on with these folks outside the kingdom of heaven. So they're still alive, or they're still existing. They still have intentional states of consciousness. Am I right?
Yes.
But they've lost freedom to think, be rational, think about abstract concepts. They've become animals. Is that correct?
Well, I would want to be a little more careful there, because what you're describing actually sounds closer to C.S. Lewis's view, And other people have defended this view, which I've just called the remains view. Like, all right, we have a monster who was a former human.
Yeah.
What's left? What is this creature that's left? Some kind of remains, right? The remains of a human. Now, Lewis describes them as psychic detritus of various sorts, like debris, right?
Okay.
And Swinburne actually takes this view as well. He says, for someone who has completely given themselves over to sin, it's like they've lost their own sense of agency or personhood. And so that it almost makes no sense to even refer to them as a self anymore. Is it Lewis or Swinburne that also calls them loose congeries of mutually antagonistic sins? Okay, they're just this like loose connection. I don't know. And so people have defended this view of what remains of humans, former humans. Now the problem I think here is that you lose psychological continuity between the former human and this monster creature, which is essential for justice, right? If the creature being punished is not personally identical to the human they were in this life, then how could punishment be fair? How could God be visiting punishment on this creature when they don't have the psychological continuity to be the same person anymore, right? So I think personal identity, continuity of personal identity is essential to justice here. And so I would want to resist the remains view of Swinburne and Lewis and a few others, and say that no, they actually do retain psychological continuity. They do have lucid thoughts. They are capable of abstract thinking.
Are they able to realize who they used to be?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's essential.
Okay. So that's definitely different than a mere animal who is just reacting.
Yes.
Do they have freedom of, are they free thinkers? Do they have libertarian freedom?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know. I'm partial to the view, this is your area, Tim, so you would know more than me. I'm partial to the view. I mean, it's been a long time since I've read this stuff, but it's generally called will setting.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So, let me see here. Yeah. So it's possible that they can retain their freedom, but, man, I don't know. I think.
Okay. That's just something else that maybe that's another paper, maybe.
Yeah. The way, we have lots of sayings for this. You can't teach an old dog new tricks. People just get stuck in their ways. I think that's basically right. The will you have now may not be as free as it was before, right? But the will you have now is the result of your freedom. So I do think that maybe in the afterlife, they could be so will set in concrete, so to speak, that they do lose any sense of libertarian freedom.
So I want to think.
Well, before we get into the second death thing here, I do want to interject here real quickly because we're going to get into that and what exactly that means, and eventually we're going to get into these monuments because that's the name of the paper that you presented. But I do want to invite people, if conversations like this are valuable to you and you want to help FreeThinking Ministries continue to produce them, you can partner with us financially through freethinkingministries.com/contact or /donate. Your support helps us continue creating podcast articles, teaching resources, and events. You can even invite us out to speak. If this sounds interesting, you could reach out to us. We could reach out to Chad. Maybe we could do something at a local church. I don't know. It could be possible. Possibilities come cheap. It might be plausible even. But make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and reach out if you want to do that. Okay. Now let's talk about the second death. Let's talk about rabies.
That's all right. Yeah, that's what I wanted to go to. Yeah.
Because
what you just recently said seems like it's different than an animal, but then you bring up rabies in your in your paper. So
Yeah.
how does that relate to your view? And maybe that will help crystallize what we actually think is going on with this view in the second death.
So let me back up a little bit. Tim was imagining, I think, a view closer to C.S. Lewis's and Richard Swinburne's, where the damned sort of lose psychological continuity with who they were. And that's a problem, I think, for justice, for the reasons I described. I think there are other problems with views that sort of lose psychological continuity, this remains view. I think if the damned remain in rebellion against God forever by being like nasty and vicious, weeping, gnashing their teeth for all eternity, I think that's a problem. I think God needs to have total and complete victory in the end. And if you have this subset of creatures in existence that are eternally gnashing their teeth at God Almighty, I don't know. It seems like universal harmony, or what the Bible calls shalom, isn't achieved. So that's another problem. Another problem is both annihilationists and universalists, they object to the traditional view on the grounds that it just seems disproportionately unjust, right?
Mm-hmm.
Eternal conscious torment in particular is what's problematic, right?
Mm-hmm.
That seems to be a punishment that just doesn't fit the crime. No matter how heinous the crime might have been in this life, eternal conscious torment? Really?
Mm-hmm.
How does that fit the crime, right? So there's a problem of disproportionate punishment. All right. Now, I do want to defend a remains view, but not the kind of view that Lewis and Swinburne were putting on the table for us. And here's where the rabid animal comes into the picture. So it's just an analogy to get us thinking about this. Rabid animals, they go through stages. By rabid animal, just an animal that's afflicted with rabies. So they go through stages. First, they go through what's called a furious phase or stage. That's characterized by extreme agitation and aggression, lack of rest, refusal to eat, self-mutilation. They'll gnaw and bite chunks of their own fur and skin off. And then here's an interesting one. Hyperesthesia. I've never heard of this before until I looked into this. This is increased sensitivity to light stimuli.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's kind of interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is all exacerbated, right? If the animal's like caught in a trap or contained in some way. So in many cases, it will violently thrash about, inflicting even more damage on itself in the process. But this all eventually gives way to a kind of exhaustion or resignation phase, where the animal becomes too weak, so weak, or even paralyzed, that it's no longer in rebellion.
This is the exhaustion stage, he said?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So it sort of undergoes a sort of neurological shutdown, and eventually it dies. So I think there's an interesting analogy here for what could happen to the damned in the afterlife. So my suggestion is that followed by so it's basically fury followed by resignation, but the lethal disease isn't rabies, right? But it's actually sin, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the conscious suffering of the damned will last only for as long as they actively rebel against God. But eventually their capacity for suffering eventually itself gives way and diminishes and deteriorates along with their body. And this would include capacities for affective senses, like desire for remorse or forgiveness. So just as some animals who have rabies, they can sort of rebel longer than others, depending on their degree of vitality and defiance and all this. I think it's natural to think that some monsters, formerly human persons, would suffer longer and more intensely, commensurate with their degree of wickedness, right? Yeah. So obviously, I don't know how time is measured in eternity or anything like that, but I mean, I imagine some monsters could suffer for a really, really, really long time, right? The worst monsters among us. But their phenomenal suffering does eventually come to an end when their affective senses and their body deteriorates. And that's what I'm calling the second death.
So some could suffer longer than others.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, okay. And that seems to make sense.
Yeah. And it fits well with the biblical passages that suggest that there are degrees of punishment in hell.
Mhm.
There's a good number of passages which would suggest that, and rewards, by the way.
Yeah.
That's the one that scares me.
Yeah.
So I say their body deteriorates. Now, what do I mean? Well, the Bible is clear that there will be a resurrection of both the righteous and the wicked, right?
Mhm.
Now, what is death? Death is simply the separation of the body from the soul. So resurrection is literally opposite of death. It's the reuniting of body with soul. Well, it's a special body in the case of the righteous. But I also think this happens with the damned, right? Resurrection of the wicked. But there's a lot of interesting clues in the Bible which suggests that the bodies of the wicked are not incorruptible like the bodies of the righteous are. And so if the bodies of the wicked are corruptible, then that would just be literally a second death. The next time the body is separated from the soul, in the case of a corruptible resurrected body, would be a second death, literally speaking. And so that's what I think happens to the damned. They lose their resurrected bodies and become immaterial souls, or what I call rarefied nous for all of eternity.
So they're disembodied.
Disembodied, yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I had a professor in undergrad that floated this idea in one of my theology classes, where he said, not the same as yours, but where he said that he thought to be embodied was the natural state of the human. So we aren't just souls or just a body. We're supposed to be both. And his view of hell was, what if it was a disembodied state for eternity? And that is the second death, where you're resurrected, but then you are disembodied for eternity, and then that's the torment. You know you're supposed to have a body, and you can never find the rest of having the whole of yourself. I know it's not the same as what you said, but it's interesting.
Very similar.
So there's this idea that once your body has deteriorated, and now you're all that's left. It's funny because, when our soul leaves our body, a lot of times we call that the husk. Like, all that's left is the husk of the soul or whatever. But this would be kind of opposite, right? Where all that's left is the inside, or not the inside. Anyway, you know what I mean? All that's left is the immaterial part. And that just kind of, for lack of a better term, floats around for eternity. That would be in and of itself a certain form of torment, don't you think?
It would, but on my view, the torment cannot be understood in terms of phenomenal conscious suffering. That's how the view handles the problem of disproportionate punishment. So I listed the three problems with the typical remains view of Lewis or Swinburne. On this view, the problem of psychological continuity is solved because while body and, in a sense, your soul are annihilated, your affective senses are annihilated, the self remains, right? There is a continuous self that remains for all of eternity. Now, the problem of disproportionate punishment is solved because this self can no longer experience phenomenal suffering. It's like they enter. Some people describe annihilationism as sort of metaphysical capital punishment. On this view, it would be more like having a metaphysical lobotomy, where you're lobotomized to the point where you can no longer experience pain, pleasure, or have any affective senses.
Well, that's interesting, because by definition, it seems an immaterial being can't have physical suffering, doesn't have nerve endings. Now, there could be a conscious kind of a
right.
So that gets me, I think, back to my original question with the intentional states of consciousness. What's going on there with this disembodied monster?
Yeah, I think there's a famous distinction in philosophy of mind between what's called phenomenal consciousness and then what's called access consciousness. This goes back to a very famous paper by Ned Block. And we all kind of experience access consciousness in that, well, if you've ever gotten blackout drunk, there you go. It's like
I haven't.
The lights are on, but no one's home. You're operating, you seem conscious. It's almost like a phenomenal zombie. Or the example, I think the original example that Ned Block gave in the paper was, imagine driving on the highway. You have a really long stretch of boring highway. You're going through central Ohio, say, where I live, and you just blank out, right? Like you're driving.
But you're still driving, yeah.
You're driving, but then all of a sudden, like you snap back into it, like, oh yeah, like you were still aware and accessing information, but something just kind of went blank there.
Yeah.
I'm imagining the damned as having access consciousness, but not phenomenal consciousness.
Okay, that helps.
Where they don't experience pain or pleasure anymore. And actually, there's precedent of this in experimental psychology. We've heard of the famous case of Phineas Gage, or people who actually have undergone lobotomies. They say that they know they're in pain, but the pain doesn't bother them anymore. So there's a way of I cite some literature here on the paper, but it's very strange for us to think about. But there's a way to be in pain without it being painful. So there could be something like that involved.
Well, I remember, who was it? The guy that wrote Nature Red and Tooth and Claw.
Yeah. Michael Murray.
Is that it? Yeah. Doesn't he talk about how the animal's brain is structured? There's different levels of pain awareness, and it's theirs isn't as bad as a human's can be.
That's right. Right. I think that's I think that would dovetail nicely with my view. They lose the capacity for suffering in that way. Yeah. But they don't lose the capacity for self-awareness or selfhood.
Yeah, and I don't know if animals have that.
Yeah. I don't know either. Probably.
Yeah, I don't think they do. I ask my dog all the time. Never get a clear answer.
So in my view, the problem of psychological continuity is solved. The problem of disproportionate suffering is solved because they don't suffer phenomenally forever. But I also think the problem of eternal rebellion is solved because the damned do eventually resign and accept their fate as just. And that goes back to the rabbit analogy.
So they're no longer sinning. They're not actively sinning anymore.
Yeah.
See, that's huge.
Think of a murderer. Here's another analogy. Think of a murderer who eventually confesses to his crimes, not because he feels remorse or because or anything like that. He feels guilt or anything like that. He knows he's caught. So when the judge pronounces him guilty, he just accepts the verdict, right? He's not in rebellion against the judge. He's not in rebellion against the verdict. He's not in rebellion against the justice system. He just accepts it. And this is actually characteristic of criminal psychopaths. Psychopathy is basically the category I'm describing here.
And also, I mean, I think it also, do you know David Wood?
Yeah.
I know you know of him, but he's a friend. And we've had some interesting discussions. I was a roommate for a while, and on a trip that we were on together, and he just doesn't have feelings like the rest of us do. The vast majority of humanity he can't have empathy the way I understand him. And he did go to jail for 5 years for attempting to murder his dad before he came to know Christ. And he didn't even try to murder his dad because he was mad. He just wanted to see if he could feel something, and so so anyway, I mean, but I think he just accepted once he realized, okay, I'm caught, big deal. I'm going to jail now. I don't, even told me we have to get Dave on here and talk to him about it. But at one point he said, "Yeah, those 5 years in prison were the best years of my life."
Yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah. But anyway, I'm thinking about, okay, but there's punishment there, but I don't know if he was really, if you can be aware of.
Well, it's an objective sense of punishment. He's not undergoing a suffering. He's not phenomenally suffering, but he is being subject to an objective condition of punishment. Yeah. I think that's exactly what happens to the damned, on my view. Yeah.
Okay.
That's interesting. I think a question that pops into my mind that an annihilationist might ask is, well, but here's the thing: rebellion has ended, suffering has ended, the body's gone. This rich affective life of the person is gone. Why not simply allow the person to cease existing? Wouldn't that be merciful? Wouldn't that be gracious? Why not just annihilate them?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's the exact question that Zachary Manis asked me when I first put this view on the table to him. Or the universalists could also ask, why not just restore them at that point, right? I think the annihilationist question, your question, is harder, though. What's the point of keeping the damned around anymore in existence after they've gone through all this process, right? And here's my proposal, and this is where I think it gets really crazy that Tim was alluding to. I think God could preserve them in existence as monuments to the significance of the earthly travail. And so I'm going to give some reasons for this, because this I think is one of the more unique aspects of my view that I don't think anyone's really explored before. So think about why we preserve some sites of tragedy. Like a most famous case would be the Nazi concentration camp of Dachau, right? There's a strong moral intuition that we have that we ought to preserve these sites. It's almost out of a sense of sacred duty, right? A testament to the gravity of what occurred there, so that destroying it would seem wrong.
It would allow people to eventually say, "Oh, that was just a myth. Didn't really happen."
Or that, yeah.
Yeah,
maybe.
Not that people don't do that anyway.
Right.
No, I think that's an interesting point. Maybe if the damned were not preserved in the same way, maybe heaven gets so good, so far advanced in the future, so far advanced in eternity, they forget, right? They forgot all about the significance of what this all meant, of how we got here, and the cost of what it took. So I think there's something to this idea that the damned could be preserved for a similar reason, as eternal monuments to this real significance of what happened. And ironically, the Greek word for image, icon, can literally mean statue or figurine. And so I'm imagining them as being preserved as living icons in a way, in this literal sense. So here's another reason. Preserving the damned as monuments also allows them to serve as a public display of God's justice. Public displays of justice are kind of out of vogue these days, but there was a time when tar and feathering was a real thing. Corporal punishment was a real thing. Execution by firing, a firing squad, or hanging. These all used to be the norm, and I think for good reasons. Seeing justice carried out is good in itself, and not merely because it deters future wrongdoing, but it's a good in itself. You're literally seeing justice, right? You have a public ledger on display of justice, and if the damned are preserved as monuments, they perform that function in exactly that way. All right, I want to give one more reason, but Tim, I see you have a quizzical look on your face.
Yeah. No, and especially if they're not suffering, why annihilate them? there's still some value there, it seems, since they were originally created in the image of God. So why would a God who still loves them just annihilate them? It seems better to just take away their suffering. And I know it's not quite the animal view that I was talking about earlier, but if, we don't kill our, we don't kill my animals unless they're suffering.
That's right. That's right. Why euthanize an animal? Because you want to end their suffering, right? If you could choose either destroying the animal or simply ending their suffering, you would choose the latter, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's exactly what happens on my view.
Okay, cool.
Or the view I'm entertaining, right?
And the question that you said, well, why not restore? Somebody asked you, why not restore them? I would say, well, given human freedom, that might not be possible, and God would know. What would happen? Again, here comes middle knowledge again. If God restored them, they just do it again.
Possibly.
I was going to say, I think part of because correct me if I'm wrong, and maybe I'm misunderstanding what you're saying here. Part of that not suffering is they have now been resigned to this was just. And so now when you restore them, it's like, oh, but was it just? To me, it's like, I think for it to be just, and this is an eternal soul, it makes the most sense to say yes, and this is the lot you chose, and you accept it, and so we're moving forward that way. So I don't know what is your response to the universalists in that regard?
I would say God wouldn't restore them simply because that's not what they deserve. They acknowledge the truth that Jesus is Lord, but they never repented or appropriated Christ's saving work for themselves, right? So that's just being restored is just simply not what they deserve.
It's like when I admit that in the last term that Biden was our president, I didn't have allegiance toward him.
That's right.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So that's basically what I was trying to get to there as well. You had one more reason, and then I had a question about the monuments. Monuments thing as well.
So here's a third reason for thinking God might preserve the damned in this condition for eternity, this monuments type condition. What are the role? And I've got some inspiration here from my good friend Dan Demetriou, who's written on the function and role of monuments in society. So, what is that? What are monuments? What function do they serve more generally? Well, they help transform mere geography to a homeland for a people. A homeland is personalized by the stories, the sacrifices, the struggles, and the tragedies of its native people, the people who lived there and whose lives were embedded in that landscape. And monuments and memorials help do this personalizing work. So the idea then is that the damned are like this. They serve that same function in the eschaton. After all, they were an indispensable part of the greatest story ever told, the story of salvation and its tragic costs. So that's the view. They suffer in the afterlife as long as they rebel, but eventually lose their capacity to suffer as their affective senses deteriorate along with their resurrected bodies, and then God preserves them as eternal monuments forever.
So when you're talking about eternal monuments, and they still have some sort of, like you said, self. It's not like they're turned into a stone, like
in Narnia.
I have little kids, like Narnia, yeah. They're not like turned into stones where it's like, oh, see that person, they rebelled. So does this view then hold that those who are redeemed, and I don't know if you say this anywhere in there, have the ability, once this monument mode is achieved, have the ability to interact and to observe these monuments? You'd have to be able to interact and observe with them for them to carry their purpose. So
that's right. I think that's exactly right. But this gets into an area of the view I haven't quite thought through yet. How do they do this? How do they interact? I think I like Zachary Manis's view that heaven and hell are not these separate places, right? They're not these separate spatiotemporal places. For him, as he describes it, hell is simply a very unpleasant way of being in God's presence for the damned. That's it. Um, and that's compatible with my view in that I don't think heaven and hell, then we need to think of these as separate spatiotemporal regions. But we could think of hell as sort of a localized region within the eschaton. Maybe it's like a graveyard or a museum or something like that, where the saved can visit. I do think that maybe that is possible. Now, if they're immaterial beings, though, in what sense, though, is that possible? Um, Now, here's where I'm not really sure. Maybe God fixes them to a physical structure of some kind, like a gravestone or a headstone. Maybe they're just like holograms. You know, there's that hologram of Princess Leia in Star Wars. Um, maybe it's something like that, but you can interact with them. I don't know what physical manifestation would be like between the saved and the lost, but I do imagine, yeah, there could be interactions between the saved and lost.
Well, I like to, you know, regarding the end or the state of nakedness that Paul discusses before we get our glorified bodies, right, for the resurrection. That's always been confusing, or not, you know, for a long time it was confusing to me. I'm like, okay, well, we're these disembodied souls, to be absent from the bodies, to be present with the Lord, but how are we interacting with Jesus and with others if we're just disembodied souls? Well, Dr. Craig once brought up the idea that, well, have you ever seen The Matrix? Neo didn't really have a body, and neither did Trinity or Morpheus when they were in the Matrix, but it sure seemed like they were, and they were interacting with each other as if they had it. Maybe something to think about as you continue to develop this.
Yeah, thank you. That could be worth exploring. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I, like we said at the beginning, at the outset, it sounds crazy. You know, like what? What do you?
Right.
But like we said before we got on, like just because something is not normal, that's something I haven't normally thought about, doesn't make it crazy. The more you explain it, the more I go, man, this makes a lot of sense. It's logical. It's reasonable, and it is taking into account all these different strains of data, and God leaves it purposefully. I don't know about ambiguous, if that's the right word, but that's the word I'm going to choose. He doesn't reveal exactly what heaven or hell is going to look like. He reveals more about what the new heavens is going to look like than he does about what hell would look like. And so, yes, we're speculating, but it seems to me that this seems reasonable. So,
it is speculative. I don't want to deny that. But of course, any model of the afterlife is going to be speculative.
Yes.
I always punt to, but we're operating within constraints here, right? We're operating within biblical constraints. We're operating within the constraints of what seems intuitively right philosophically. And the goal is to sort of craft a view that does as much work as we can. But I always think about that verse where it's the glory of God to conceal a matter, but it's the glory of kings to search it out, right? That's all we're doing here. So we're being kings, right? We're just searching these matters out to God's glory.
Yeah, I love it. So at the end of the presentation, I remember you saying, so is this true? I don't know. I love that line. Yeah. You're definitely open to it being true. Yeah. And but you're not going to be dogmatic about it and say, no, this is the view of hell that everybody ought to hold. And
I like
you won me over. You won me over to think, okay, this is a view that we have to take seriously, and put it on the table of possibilities.
Yeah, I like the idea of this monument view. Partly, I think I'm partial to it, partly because one of the questions that Tim and I get a lot in our own ministry is, well, will we have free will in heaven? Like, could we sin in heaven? And it seems to me this monument view is like, it's an assurance, and it reflects a pattern of what God did through Israel, and he creates these remembrances and monuments of, hey, this is what I did. Remember, this is what I did. And almost like this is almost flipped. in heaven, it's like, now you remember everything I did, but let's not also forget the things that humans did so that you don't go back there. And it seems to me that
Oh,
there's
very
almost like
good.
an inversion of the monument, where in fallen world, the monument is a testament to what God is doing to redeem mankind. In this heavenly realm, in the new heavens and new earth, the monument is a reminder of that fallen world, so that free creatures operating within heaven are remember, like you said, 2 millennia from now, yes, that did happen. That
Yeah.
is the reason we're here. That monument helps preserve that freedom and preserve perfection. So it seems to me that there's a little bit of interplay with that. Obviously, that's just off the top of my head, but that's where my mind went as you were explaining it.
That's really insightful. And boy, if I pick this back up and work on this again, I might shoot you an email and work this out a bit more and give you some credit for that insight. I like that a lot. And you know what? Speaking of G.K. Beale, he's also got this other book. I think it's called Redemptive Reversals, where he goes through the whole canon and he looks at how God has this huge sense of irony, right? Where things often get flipped upside down. There's on their heads, there's irony here, irony there. And that would kind of fit this sort of structure of irony that you see throughout the Bible that Beale talks about in his book.
So could you say that to make the universalist happy, could you say that every first person perspective, that every self is ultimately in the kingdom of God, but not everyone is glorified? All right, so the damned, they become these monsters, or but they're not rebelling anymore, they're not suffering, so they're almost like, they're not animals, but it's almost like they're still in the kingdom.
Yeah,
they're not suffering.
Yeah. No,
so you could say
that's a good point too. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That would maybe go. I think universalists would be least happy with this view, but maybe that could, be a couple steps toward, something they would like. Yeah, I think, that's right.
But but the image of God that they were created to obtain, that's been annihilated. So there's your annihilationism. So you can make the annihilationists happy, or at least build a bridge with them. With the universalist, what I just talked about, and with the traditionalist, that's a view of traditionalism that you're giving. Yeah. So is there any other views that we need to incorporate here?
Well, the three: universalism, traditionalism, and annihilationism. I mean, those are the main views, and I think it's got strong elements of all three.
It does.
So I like it for that. For the and it's even more universalist than I thought. To your point, Tim, I hadn't thought of that, so I'll have to bring that in as well. You guys are going to be getting a lot of footnotes.
Well, I just think you should write more on this, because this is unique to you as far as I know, and it's I think it's important. It's going to answer solve many problems, I think, and it would make when something makes a great story, you almost have to kind of sit back and wonder, well, I wonder if that is reflective of the great reality that God has created.
God is a storyteller.
Right.
He's the greatest storyteller.
And this would make a fantastic, I could just imagine a movie being made with this, and watching the rabid, the human become rabid, and hating the light, exposing its sin. And you can start to see that in the world in front of us. I think you can start to see the process begin, but then to see the whole thing happen, and to see them become monsters, but then to stop rebelling. And I just really encourage you to keep doing this. It's fascinating. Josh, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say, I think anytime, I think we have an intuition in our imagination about what some things are actually like in the spirit realm, like ghost stories. There's a reason those have been around for ages. And as I'm thinking about this, I'm like, man, this makes sense of some of those intuitions. Like I said, it still needs to be fleshed out. There's still some things, but it is so attractive in that it explains so much of the data, and it's reasonable. It's not fanciful. It's not just like it's not a novel. It actually has real points of data. So, hey, thanks for putting in the work to think about such a complex and difficult topic. And we get to be the bearers or the people who receive that fruit. So thank you for that labor. I don't know if it's a labor of love, but thank you for the labor in that regard.
Well, let me end with a C.S. Lewis quote, if you'll permit me, because I beat up on Lewis a little bit for having not as good of a remains view. But I think he is on board with the spectrum view stuff. Mm-hmm. But this is a positive note, though, to end on this. I'm sure you guys have heard this quote before, but I've got it pulled up. It says, "It's a serious thing to remember that the dullest and most uninteresting person you talk to may one day be a creature which, if you saw it now, you would be strongly tempted to worship, or else a horror and a corruption such as you now meet, if at all, only in a nightmare. All day long, we are in some degree helping each other to one or other of these destinations. It is in the light of these overwhelming possibilities, it is with the awe and circumspection proper to them, that we should conduct all our dealings with one another, all friendships, all loves, all play, all politics. There are no ordinary people. You have never talked to a mere mortal. Nations, cultures, arts, civilization, these are all mortal, and their life is to ours as the life of a gnat. But it is immortals whom we joke with, work with, marry, snub, and exploit, immortal horrors or everlasting splendors." And so I think the instinct of objecting to the spectrum view, because it has this moral implication that not everyone is equally valuable, can be beat back by saying, look, if the spectrum view is true, this should heighten our moral awareness of our interactions with people every single day, because we are on this spectrum and we need to be helping each other, and to one end or the other, right? Hopefully the better.
Yeah, absolutely love it.
That's good.
And that brings this whole thing that you've done here. That's where the rubber meets the road, and we can see how if this view is true, and we need to treat it as if it could be. That really makes a difference with how we live our lives today and how we treat one another.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. That's what's so attractive to me about it. It's very practical as well. Like I said, and very there's an evangelistic proponent. Like, I don't want you to become a monster or a monument.
Right.
Like, right. I'd rather you be in the glorified state. So, Chad, for those people who are watching this and don't know where they can find any more of your stuff, why don't you give a plug for where people can find some more of your work? This is not the only thing you talk about. This is actually a very small thing that you've talked about. But where can they find you?
Yeah, my website is camcintosh.com, and I think I have all my current publications up there. So including the articles on this, I got an article on the spectrum view of the Imago Dei, and in my exchange with Zachary Manis on how well this holds up, and that's where I first proposed the monuments bit. So yeah, you can find that stuff there, or just reach out to me. I got some later drafts if you're curious. I'd be happy to share those with you.
Cool. And your website has like almost every argument for God's existence on there or something like that.
Yeah. So if you go to camcintosh.com, there's the profile portal where you go to my work and everything. And then there's the theistic arguments side, where I think it's the most comprehensive collection of arguments for God's existence in the universe. But they're not like, I'm not pulling in Kirk Cameron's banana argument or anything like that. These are all arguments that are in peer-reviewed publications and all this stuff. So it's a comprehensive guide to theistic arguments. Yeah.
Good.
That's good. That link will be in the description as well for people who watch the video. Tim, is there anything else we want to explore before we sign off?
Oh, I don't know about exploring, but Chad actually wrote a foreword to a book that Joshua Ferris and I co-edited, and we both contributed to it as well. But it's an all-star list. I'm definitely the low man on the totem pole of the contributors in this book, but it's dedicated to the work of C.S. Lewis. And Chad, thank you for writing the foreword to that. That should be, I'm hoping that's out and published later this year. So
cool. Yeah, that was awesome. I was puzzled why I was even asked to consider that, but I was proud to do it. Glad to do
it. Well, we respect you and really are amazed at how God is using your mind. And I love it. I love getting together with you at EPSs because we're always going to have a fun time together. We're always going to have find things that we agree on, disagree on, and we're going to have fun talking about, even when we disagree on things, we make it fun. Mm-hmm. And you know, and you're great at that. So yeah.
Are you going to be in Denver?
Oh yeah.
All right, we'll see you there.
Yeah, cool. You bet. We'll have a good time.
Awesome.
All right.
Thanks,
well,
guys.
We'll put links to our guest's work. We'll put links to his work all in the description. Anything we've discussed today, you can find on his website. And if this conversation has helped you think more clearly about hell, human nature, the image of God, justice of God, we've talked about a lot of important theological topics. Make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with somebody who you think would enjoy wrestling with some of these questions, or maybe needs to wrestle with some of these questions. And if you want to help out with FreeThinking Ministries and these continued conversations like this, you can learn more about supporting the ministry at freethinkingministries.com. Thanks for joining us, Chad. And as we always say here at FreeThinking Ministries,
stay reasonable.
Stay reasonable.